They sat me at the back, behind the cousins who only came around when there was barbecue or inheritance. Behind the church ladies with their broad-brimmed hats and stories they liked to tell as if they'd known him better than I had. Behind my son and his wife, her hand possessive on his arm, as if claiming the grief for herself, and when I saw the program stacked neatly on each pew except the one I was placed on, I understood. They had made room for me, yes, but they had removed me from the center of the story. I'm Evelyn Ross, 71, and that was the moment I knew they had let me go. Subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Thanks. I don't remember much of the sermon. I sat very still. I remember a sunbeam catching on the silver rim of my cane, and the heat of it seeping into the bones of my hand. I remember the slight scent of lemon polish on the pew and the faint cough of a baby too young to understand that silence had become sacred, but I don't remember the words. Because when they carried my husband's body, my Leonard, down the aisle, they walked right past me. No one looked at me, not my son, not my daughter. It was as though I was not his wife. As though 50 years of folding his socks, feeding him soup through chemo, holding his hand through bankruptcy and laughter had all happened in some private, invisible world they had no interest in acknowledging. I had worn the grey dress he always said made me look like the first day of spring. My hands shook too much to fasten the brooch. I asked my daughter to help, and she said, "Mom, I'm trying to get the kids ready. Can you just wait?" So I wore it without the brooch, without the pearl earrings he gave me for our 40th. I couldn't find them. I think my granddaughter borrowed them and never gave them back, or maybe they were pawned. When I got to the church, they looked surprised to see me. That's when I knew it wasn't the program, it wasn't the seating. It was the look on my daughter-in-law's face, mild panic, discomfort, as though I had shown up uninvited to a party that was meant to be about him, not me. My husband, he died on a Tuesday. The hospice nurse called at 3:14 in the morning. I had been sleeping in a chair next to him, a pillow behind my neck, his hand still warm in mine. My daughter arrived 2 days later. My son never came until the night before the funeral. They said they were handling arrangements. I thought they meant flowers, music, food. I didn't realize they also meant the obituary, the seating, the story. In the printed program, I was mentioned once. Wife, Evelyn, no surname, no mention of our wedding date. The 3 cities we moved through. Or the small bookstore we built together when I was 42 and desperate to matter. They told a story of a man who loved golf, fishing, and grandkids. They left out his poetry, his stubborn kindness, the way he danced with me in the kitchen even after his legs grew weak. They turned him into a lawn ornament, and in doing so, they erased me. It had been happening for years, but I hadn't wanted to see it. After the burial, people gathered at my son's house. I was driven there by one of the neighbors. My son never asked if I needed a ride. When I walked in, someone else had already sliced the lemon cake I had baked that morning. I had brought it in a covered glass dish, the one Leonard gave me when we still lived in Minnesota. It was on the counter, half empty, with crumbs on a paper plate beside it. They were laughing in the kitchen about something on the radio. My daughter said, "Mom's cake is good," and someone else said, "Oh, was that hers?" And I just stood there. There was nowhere to sit, so I leaned against the wall, next to the photos on the staircase. None of me. I stayed for 22 minutes. Then I left. I took the dish with me. It was sticky. They hadn't washed it. I didn't care. I put it in a grocery bag and walked 2 blocks to the bus stop. I don't think anyone noticed I was gone. That night, I sat in Leonard's chair. His old flannel robe was draped over the armrest, the one that still smelled faintly of cedar and cough drops. And I pulled the legal folder from the bottom drawer of the hutch. It had been there since 1999. We drafted the will together when the kids were still calling me Mom instead of her. Back when I still believed they loved us for who we were, not what we had, I read every line. Then I picked up the phone and called Margaret Baines, the notary down the road. She still owed me a favor for covering her booth at the library fundraiser last spring. She came the next day, and I changed my mind. Because if they could sit me at the back of my husband's funeral, then they would have already decided I didn't belong at the front of anything. And I finally believed them. The thing about being needed is that it feels so close to being loved. You can almost mistake one for the other if you're tired enough, and I was tired for years. I used to wake before the sun, even when the kids had moved out. Old habits settle into your spine. I'd make the coffee not the single-serve kind, but the full pot, with the lid that clicked just so, and let the smell fill the kitchen before the day could press in with its weight. Leonard liked it strongly. I liked it quiet. I remember tying my apron behind my back with hands still sore from folding laundry the night before. Not for me, but for them. My daughter would drop off clothes in plastic baskets, smiling sheepishly. Just a few things, Mom. She always made it sound casual, temporary. But I was still folding her jeans when she was 38, and I didn't mind. Not then. It's easy to give when you believe it's being seen. I brought chicken soup every time my son's kids had the sniffles. Not the canned kind. I slowly simmered the broth, picked out the bones, and used the egg noodles they liked. Once, I left it on their porch with a handwritten note and a little comic strip tucked in for the oldest, the one who used to call me Grand Evie. That name disappeared, eventually, along with the calls. When Leonard lost his job at the hardware store in '91, I picked up shifts at the library, shelving books, running children's story hour. Even though my knees ached, I taught myself how to run a cash register at 48 so I could work weekends at the bookstore downtown. That bookstore kept our lights on for 6 years. The kids didn't know that, or if they did, it's not something they ever brought up. I remember birthdays, all of them. I kept a spiral-bound notebook with a page for each family member's favorite colors, cake preferences, clothing sizes. I still have it, somewhere in the drawer under the phone that never rings anymore, for my daughter's 33rd. I sewed her lavender quilt. It took me for months. I stitched each panel by hand, even embroidered her initials into one of the corners. She thanked me politely, folded it, and I never saw it again. It's not that they were cruel. That's the thing. They were preoccupied. Busy, they'd say, with work, with kids, with life, and I suppose I understand that. I was once busy too, with dishes stacked to the ceiling and field trip forms tucked into every coat pocket. I had years when I didn't sleep properly, when I ate standing up, when I dreamed of a single silent evening. But I never forgot them. Even when Leonard got sick the first time, I was still the one baking for their bake sales, watching their kids, remembering which child had which allergies. I remember once, when my son called years ago and he sounded tired, strained. His youngest had a fever. His wife was working late. He asked if I could come by just for a few hours. I was already in my pajamas. It was snowing. But I put on my coat, packed a thermos of chamomile, and went. I stayed for 6 hours. Washed their dishes, put the baby to sleep, left a note saying, "You're doing great." He never mentioned it again. Maybe that's what motherhood is, doing the invisible, and hoping it forms something solid beneath their feet. There were years when I paid for their insurance premiums without telling Leonard, quietly transferred money into their accounts so their lights wouldn't be cut off, even took out a second mortgage to help my daughter through her second divorce. She said, "I'll pay you back." She never did, and still, I said yes when they asked for more. Because when they walked into the house and flopped onto my couch, it made me feel like the center of something. Like a tree they still came back to. Leonard used to say, "You spoil them." I think I did, but it wasn't just spoiling, it was Keeping them close, I hosted it every Easter, made deviled eggs the way their father liked them. Even after he stopped eating much, I set out little baskets for the grandkids. Hand-labeled with ribbon and care, sometimes I'd find the wrappers. In the yard weeks later, melted chocolate ground into the swing set Leonard built when he still had the strength in his shoulders. No one offered to host after he got sick. They stopped coming as often, called instead, left cheerful voicemails with phrases like, "We're thinking of you," or "Hang in there, Mom." And I held those voicemails like scripture. I didn't resent them then, I just thought they were busy. But when you give and the room still grows cold, you start to notice the draft. After Leonard's second diagnosis, I didn't ask for help. I told myself it was pride, but it was really fear. Fear that if I asked, they'd say no, and the illusion would shatter. So I did it all. I cleaned the bedpan, I cut his pills, I read to him when his eyes got too dry. I rubbed his feet and made him laugh even when the morphine had dulled most of his edges. I kept the house quiet so he could sleep. I cancelled my book club, stopped watching my favorite shows. I lived in service of a man who had always loved me in silence, not with grand gestures, but with constancy, with the way he filled my gas tank without telling me, with how he scraped the ice off my windshield at 5 a.m. in January, and I did it, all while they lived their lives. That's not bitterness, that's just truth. When he died, they stepped in quickly, not to help, but to manage, to organize, to take control, and I let them. Because I thought maybe, just maybe, this would be the moment when they'd finally see me again. I didn't expect gratitude. Not really, I just wanted presence, but they gave me distance, they gave me efficiency, and then they gave me the back pew. It's strange, the things you remember. I remember pouring juice into sippy cups while the news played in the background. I remember tying tiny shoes and clapping at kindergarten graduations. I remember catching colds from their colds and still showing up anyway. I remember giving my whole body to this family. And now I remember the silence that followed theirs. A kind of hurt that doesn't shout. It hums like a fridge at midnight, or the ache in your knees before rain. I hear it everywhere now. And the only thing louder than that hum is the quiet that comes after you finally stop answering the phone. It doesn't happen all at once. There's no single thunderclap. No grand betrayal that signals a turning. Not at first. It happens like water dripping beneath the sink. Slow, rhythmic, ignorable until the wood is swollen and soft, and by then the damage has long been done. My hurt with them was like that, 100 quiet things, small enough to excuse, but too many to forget. I remember once, years before Leonard got sick, I called my daughter just to hear her voice. It had been over a month. I used to write the dates down in the back of my planner, the last time they called, the last time they came by, the last time they said, "Love you, Mom." That day, I called her cell and it went to voicemail. I left a simple message, just checking in, nothing urgent. She didn't call back. Not that day, not the next. 3 days later, I saw a photo of her on social media holding a glass of wine at a vineyard. Laughing with friends, she looked happy. And I stared at that picture for a long time, trying to remember the last time she'd laughed like that with me. It's a quiet thing realizing you are no longer in someone's top 5 calls. No longer the instinct when something goes right or wrong. Another time, my son stopped by to borrow a power drill. Didn't come inside. Just stood on the porch, eyes on his phone, tapping his keys like there was somewhere more important he needed to be. He said, "Thanks," over his shoulder as he walked back to his car. He didn't ask how I was. I stood at the door long after he'd driven off, the silence sitting beside me like a second coat, and I told myself it was fine. He's busy, he's got 2 kids and a mortgage. But the thing is, I had 2 kids and a mortgage too, and I still found time. I still cared enough to ask. There was Thanksgiving maybe 6, 7 years ago when I made everything. Roasted turkey, mashed potatoes with garlic butter, green beans with bacon, the rolls they liked from that old family recipe. I even polished the good silver. They were an hour late, no call. No apology when they did arrive. My granddaughter said she wasn't hungry. My son was on his phone the whole time, and my daughter-in-law asked if the turkey was store-bought. I laughed then, quietly, said, "No, I've been basting it since 8 a.m. She just nodded. No one asked to take leftovers. After they left, I sat in the kitchen and ate one of the rolls cold. I didn't cry. I washed every dish slowly, stacking them one by one, listening to the old radio in the corner of Leonard's favorite jazz station and wondering if maybe I had just missed something along the way. Maybe I hadn't taught them well enough how to love back. But deep down, I knew it wasn't a failure of parenting. It was a quiet choice they made, again and again, to turn away. There were other injuries when Leonard went into the hospital. The 3rd time the nurses asked for an emergency contact, I gave them my son's number. They called. He didn't pick up. He texted later, "Sorry, at work. Can you keep me updated?" Updated, as if I were some nurse on staff. Not his mother, not the woman who bore him, fed him, sang him to sleep even when I had fevers of my own. And then there was Christmas, the last one before Leonard passed. I had wrapped their gifts with care. Each tag is handwritten, each one tied with twine and a small sprig of rosemary, like I used to when they were little. I even found an old photo album and slipped it into my daughter's gift bag photos from when she was 8, wearing a paper crown, dancing in the living room. She opened it, looked through 2 pages, then set it aside. "Cute," she said. That. Was it cute? I told myself again that I was being too sensitive, that people change, that the world moves faster now. But even in that knowing, I felt the dull ache of being overlooked, of being background noise in a story I had once been. The heart of what I've learned is that erasure doesn't need cruelty. Sometimes all it needs is neglect, and that's what they gave me. They didn't scream, didn't fight, didn't say hateful things. They just didn't show up, and when they did, it was partial, distracted. As though their presence was a checkbox. As though they had done enough by simply walking through the door. Leonard noticed. He never said much, but I'd catch his eyes when they left early. When the house echoed again too soon. When the food sat cold and untouched on the table. He'd put his hand on mine and squeeze once. That was all. He knew. He didn't want to say it, but he knew. I think that's what hurt me most, that even as he faded, he could feel the distance too, and I had to carry that on top of the grief. There was a day, one of the last, when Leonard was in bed, barely speaking. The sun was streaming in just so, and I was reading to him from a book he loved. The doorbell rang. It was a flower delivery, a small bouquet, no card. To this day, I don't know who sent it. But I remember thinking, this is what it's come to, unnamed kindness, anonymous gestures, because my own children, the ones I raised, protected, fed, could not find the time to sit beside their dying father. They sent texts, promised to visit next week, but next week never came. After he passed, I found a voicemail from my son 2 days later. "Hey Mom, sorry I missed your call. Things have just been nuts. Hope you're okay." That was all. No mention of Leonard. No, "I love you. Just hope you're okay." 100 quiet hurts. Each one a thread, tugged loose. Each one a splinter, left into long, and still I never yelled, never confronted. Because what would I have said? Please remember me. Please act like I matter. No, some things are too painful to ask for out loud. Because if they say no, it breaks something you can't rebuild. So I stayed silent, tended the wounds like they were mine alone to nurse, and they were, because no one else saw them, or worse, they saw and didn't care. Now, when I think back on those years, I don't feel anger at first. I feel emptiness, the kind that accumulates slowly, like dust, until one day you run your hand along the shelf and realize you can't even see the wood beneath it. There is always one line. It may come after 1,000 small ones have already been smudged and stepped over, but eventually there is one final line that does not bend, for me. That line came on a Thursday afternoon in late August, 2 weeks after Leonard's funeral. The house was still quiet, but not in the way it had been when he was here, not in that hushed, reverent way. This quiet was different, hollow, thin, the kind that makes your skin itch. I've been trying to stay busy, dusting things that didn't need dusting, organizing receipts from 5 years ago. Cooking enough for 2 even though there was only me. Some habits die slower than people. That afternoon, I had been sitting at the kitchen table, sorting through a stack of envelopes. Most were sympathy cards, some already yellowing at the edges, with kind but forgettable words. A few had checks tucked inside. I hadn't cashed any of them. I couldn't bring myself to. Grief makes everything feel like a transaction. Then I found it. A large manila envelope, no return address, just my name, slanted handwriting that looked too familiar to dismiss. Inside were legal papers, the house, the deed, the trust Leonard. And I had written back in 1999, the one we updated again in 2011 after his first surgery. I'd known the documents were with the lawyer. I hadn't expected to see them again so soon. But what caught my breath was a stapled page on top news, dated a month before Leonard died. It listed a revised beneficiary. It transferred power of attorney retroactively. It included signatures. One of them was mine, but I hadn't signed it. I sat there staring at the curve of the Ian Evelyn, the way the Y curled back beneath the line. It was close to close, but not mine. My hand didn't shake. Not then. It was almost like my body went cold to protect me from what it already knew. I laid the paper flat, smoothing it out with both palms, like pressing a wound. My son's name was listed, not as a co-owner, as the sole inheritor of the house Leonard and I had built together. Paid off in 2004, remodeled with our own hands. Every nail in that kitchen wall had passed through Leonard's fingers, and it had been taken quietly, cleverly, without a word. The lawyer's name was familiar, a friend of my son's. He used to mow our lawn as a teenager. I didn't call anyone that day. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just sat there. The refrigerator hummed. The clock ticked. Somewhere outside, a lawnmower started. And I stared at a version of my own name I hadn't written. I suppose, in hindsight, the signs had been there. A few months before Leonard died, my son had asked if we'd put things in order. I told him we had. I even showed him the file cabinet. I remember the way he smiled a strange, closed-lipped smile and said, "Good to know." He must have gone back. When Leonard started sleeping more than he was awake, I moved to the guest room. To let him rest, I would wake early, make coffee and tend the garden. I suppose those were the hours they used to slip in when I wasn't looking. Taking what hadn't been offered. It was theft. But worse than that, it was erased. They didn't argue with me, didn't tell me I was unfit or incapable. They just bypassed me. As if I were already gone, as if Leonard's death had turned me to dust along with him, and I think that was the deepest cut. Not the paper, not the false signature, but the idea that my presence no longer mattered enough to even fight against. They didn't confront me, they simply erased me from my own life. I sat at the table until the light changed, until the shadows grew long and the kitchen turned gold, then grey. I didn't eat, didn't speak. I remember the ache in my hips, the stiffness in my neck. I stood only when I heard the mail slot open again. Another envelope, this one from the bank. It was addressed to my son at my address. I didn't open it, not then, But I knew, somewhere along the way, accounts had been moved, names changed, stories rewritten, and the truth of it was they had been planning this. Long before Leonard's funeral, probably long before his final decline, that night I poured a glass of water, just water, my hands were too cold for tea. I sat in Leonard's chair, the legal papers on my lap, and stared at the wall where we used to hang the Christmas cards. It was bare now, just a few leftover bits of tape clinging to the paint. I thought of the first time we stood in this house. It was 1981. I was wearing a red scarf. Leonard had lifted me over the threshold in a silly, movie-type gesture, even though I told him I was too heavy. He said, "You're not heavy. You're home. And now someone has tried to sell my home out from under me, sign it away," while I was still sleeping down the hall. While I was still brushing my teeth at that same old sink, still folding Leonard's blankets in the living room. They thought I wouldn't notice, or worse, that I wouldn't care. But I did, and something in me went still, not angry, not loud, just still. I placed the papers in a clean folder, put it in the drawer with the old insurance documents. Then I locked the drawer, not to hide it, but because it was mine, my decision, my next move, and I knew in that moment something had shifted inside me. There would be no confrontation, no scene, no shouted accusations in parking lots or living rooms. But a line had been crossed, and I had finally seen them for who they'd become, not enemies, not monsters, just people who had chosen convenience over care. People who believed love came with conditions and that silence was the same as consent. But silence is never consent, it's just waiting. And I was done waiting. By the time the sun rose the next morning, I had already written a list. 3 names, 1 phone number, and a note to myself that read, simply, "You are not gone." It started quietly, the way a door eases closed when no one's watching. Not a slam. Just a click. The morning after I found the forged signature, I got up like usual, made coffee, folded the blanket on Leonard's chair, opened the blinds halfway, just as he used to like enough light to feel alive, but not enough to blind you. I moved through the house like a whisper, no calls, no texts. I had nothing left to explain. Silence wasn't a decision I announced. It was something that settled over me. Like dust on the mantle, it arrived in the pauses I stopped filling, in the favors I stopped offering, in the questions I no longer asked. I didn't call my son that week, or the next. I didn't send the usual card to my daughter when her youngest started 3rd grade. I didn't bake for the fall festival at the church where my name was still listed as a volunteer, though no one had asked me in over a year, and no one noticed. At least, no one said they did. That was its own kind of answer. I took Leonard's old briefcase down from the top shelf of the hallway closet. It smelled of cedar and old paper. Inside, I found what I had tucked away over the years: utility statements, policy copies, a few yellowing tax forms. I placed the fake legal documents inside, sealed it again, and slid it under the bed. Then I called a name I hadn't said out loud in nearly a decade, Eleanor Pike. We'd worked together back when I did grant filing for the library board. She'd gone on to become a paralegal, then worked for a firm in the city. I didn't know if she was still there, or if she even remembered me, but she did. I didn't tell her everything on the phone. Just asked if we could meet. She said yes, and offered to drive me. I told her I'd come to her. I wanted to leave the house. I needed to be somewhere that didn't know Leonard's name. We met at a cafe tucked behind a dry cleaner and a dentist's office, one of those places with wooden booths that creak when you lean the wrong way. She ordered tea. I asked for water. I slid the documents across the table. She looked them over with a slow, professional rhythm. Her lips pressed together in a straight line that deepened with every page. "This isn't your signature," she said. After a while, I nodded. I know, she didn't ask how I got them. She didn't ask why I hadn't acted sooner. She just looked at me with something close to understanding, maybe pity. But I didn't want pity. I wanted clarity. That's when the silence inside me began to harden, take shape. Eleanor promised to make a few calls, told me she'd send the documents to a forensic analyst she trusted. I thanked her. She asked if I was okay. I said I was. I wasn't, but I would be. When I got home, I didn't go inside right away. I stood in the driveway, my hand on the hood of Leonard's car, the one we used to take on weekend drives out to the hills, back when time felt wider. I looked up at the house. The roof we'd patched together, the porch he painted while humming Sinatra, the garden I kept going even when my knees didn't want to bend. And I realized how much of me was stitched into every corner of it. I had been quiet for so long that even I had forgotten the sound of my own certainty. But silence can be powerful too. Not the kind that waits for permission, the kind that watches, plans, builds. I stopped answering their messages. I didn't block anyone. Just let the conversations die on their own. There was one voicemail from my son. About 3 weeks after the funeral. Hey Mom, just checking in. Haven't heard from you. Hope everything's all right. It sounded casual, almost bored. He didn't call again. I listened to that message once, then I deleted it. I started reading again, books I had abandoned when Leonard's appointments became my full-time schedule. Books about women who disappeared and came back stronger. I made notes in the margins, underlined sentences that cut to close. I started walking again, too, around the block at first. Then to the park. I kept my head down, wore Leonard's old coat. It smelled of peppermints and thyme. I opened a new savings account. In my name only, I took inventory of every drawer, every cabinet. I made a list of what mattered and what didn't. I found the pearl earrings tucked in a sock drawer, under my granddaughter's old school sweatshirt. She must have left them here. I cleaned them gently and wore them the next day to the grocery store. Not because anyone would see them, but because I reached out to a woman named Joan. Someone I used to know from a sewing group. She had lost her husband last year and lived alone in a condo off Baker Street. We met for tea once a week, talked mostly about plants. It was the first time in a long while I spoke without measuring every word. I didn't talk about the forged documents, not yet, but my silence was shifting, no longer passive. Now it has a shape, weight, purpose. I wrote letters, not to send. Just to say the things I couldn't before, to Leonard, to my son, to my daughter. I folded them and placed them inside an old show box with a satin lining. I called it my quiet box. Every time I opened it, I reminded myself I was not crazy. I was not invisible. I was awake. And in my stillness, I was gathering strength, options, proof. Sometimes silence is not surrender. Sometimes it's the sound before the storm knows it's coming. I began to see them clearly. Not as the people I had raised, but as the people they had chosen to become. I stopped trying to understand their choices. Instead, I started making my own. By the time Eleanor called me back for weeks after our meeting, I already knew what she would say. Yes, she said, it was forged. I thanked her. She asked what I wanted to do next, and I told her I wasn't sure yet. But I would know. Soon that evening, I lit a candle and sat at the table where Leonard used to read the newspaper. I made a small pot of tea. No distractions, no TV. Just me, just quiet. I had never felt more alone, or more certain this silence wasn't a weakness. It was a blade, sharpened slowly, and I was learning how to hold it. There's something that happens when you stop asking for love in places where it was never meant to stay. The ground shifts, slightly at first. You begin to walk lighter, not because the pain is gone, but because you're no longer dragging it behind you like a broken wing. After Eleanor confirmed the signature was forged, I didn't shout, didn't storm into anyone's house. I didn't hold the documents while shaking hands at my son's doorstep. That would have given them too much power. It would have made their betrayal the center of the story. And I was tired of letting them write the ending, so I moved differently. The first thing I did was open the window in the back bedroom, the one that had been shut since Leonard passed. The air that came in was cool, damp with the hint of autumn, and smelled faintly of dry leaves and the neighbor's pine tree. I stood there a long time, just breathing. Then I pulled every box out of the closet, old sweaters, children's toys, a crib mobile with soft fabric stars that no longer spun. I sorted through it all. Some I kept, most I gave away. I called the church, asked about donating. The woman who answered the phone didn't recognize my name. I didn't correct her. I just told her I'd be by Tuesday morning with a few bags. That Tuesday, I dropped off 5 large sacks. I left them by the front steps because no one came to the door. I didn't wait. I stopped by the bank next. Not the one we had always used, the one my son had transferred accounts into without my knowledge. I went to a small credit union too. Towns over, quiet, unassuming. I liked the way the teller smiled like she had time. I opened a new account with the savings I'd quietly built over the past year, little bits here and there, money from Leonard's final pension check, returns from old books I sold online. And gift money no one remembered giving. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I set up a meeting with Eleanor's colleague, a woman named Carla who specialized in elder rights and estate recovery. She wore plain jackets and spoke like someone who had seen too much to waste words. We reviewed every document together. She took notes, made copies, and highlighted patterns. She never once made me feel like a burden. She never once spoke down to me. Which was more than I could say for the people who used to call me Mom. She told me I had a strong case. I told her I didn't want a case. I wanted my name back. She nodded, said, "Sometimes those are the same thing." It was early November by then. The light changed. Sharpened, shadows got longer, and the days came in. Like whispers. I started sleeping with the window cracked open, just a sliver. The house felt less like a tomb and more like something breathing again. One morning I stood in front of the mirror and took a good look at myself. 71 lines. Under my eyes. Yes, a softness in my jaw that used to be sharper, but the same dark eyes that Leonard used to call storm-colored, the same shoulders that had carried to children, one marriage. A lifetime of small miracles and bruises no one else ever saw. I bought myself a new coat, navy blue, wool. It had deep pockets, the kind that could carry your hands and your secrets at the same time. I took walks more often, no earbuds, no distractions, just the sound of gravel under my feet and the rhythm of my own breath. I passed the houses where families had once lived, familiar silhouettes in windows. Now changed, some kids are grown and gone. Some marriages quietly dissolved. I wondered if those women felt like I did, like ghosts with hands still warm. I started visiting the community center again. They'd built a small garden in the back. I signed up to help with pruning. It was simple work, cutting what no longer served, shaping what still had life. There's something holy about trimming dead branches. One Tuesday, I met a woman named Ruth, widow, 73. She wore bright scarves and carried a small thermos of black coffee with a twist of cinnamon. She invited me to a book circle. I said I'd think about it. The next week, I went. No one asked what I used to be. They just handed me a chair and asked if I liked peppermint tea. I moved differently at home too. I started writing again, not for anyone else, just for me, memories, recipes. Bits of Leonard's old sayings I didn't want to lose, things like, buy the good peaches, and you never regret kindness, but you always remember cruelty. I wrote down every detail of the forgery, not for court, for truth. So that when the doubt crept in, and it did, often I could look back and remember that I was not imagining it, that I had been taken from, and that I had chosen, finally, not to be taken again. One night I burned a candle for Leonard, not on a special day, just because I sat at the table, his flannel robe draped across my lap like a memory, and whispered, "I'm still here. I don't know what I expected, maybe nothing." But in that stillness, I felt something loosen, the need for explanation, the ache for apology, the wish for things to be undone. I no longer needed any of it, because I had begun to become someone else, not new, but returned, the me I was before I became a fixture in someone else's narrative. I didn't tell my children about the case. Didn't write them letters, didn't call. I knew they would notice eventually when mail stopped coming to their house, when names on documents changed, when the polite emails from the estate lawyer began using only my name. By then I would be too far gone to explain, not in distance, but in resolve. I had a new lawyer, a new account, a new rhythm, and I had peace, the kind that doesn't come with closure, but with clarity, and every day I moved in that quiet clarity. I reclaimed something they thought I wouldn't notice was missing, myself. They had taken my name from a piece of paper, but they hadn't taken my will, and now it is being rewritten by my own hand. I used to think that if I stepped back, everything would fall apart, that the house would stop running. The birthdays would go unnoticed, the kids would stumble without my reminders, my casseroles, my steadiness. I believed that my presence, my hovering, my helpfulness, my habit of saying yes was the thread holding things together. But when I stopped, nothing fell apart, at least not right away. That's the part that hurts the most in the beginning. You expect the silence to ring out, for the absence to echo, for someone to notice. Instead, the world keeps spinning. They keep going, text chains go unanswered but not unsent, photos are posted. Smiles keep showing up in little squares on screens you're not invited to see anymore. But there's a shift, eventually. Slow, imperceptible at first, like a house settling on its foundation. The first time I saw it was in late December. It had snowed the night before, a heavy one. The kind that leaves the trees dipped in quiet and the mailboxes buried up to their chins. I hadn't heard from anyone in weeks. My granddaughter used to text me after her midterms. She didn't that year. I sat by the window with a cup of Earl Grey and watched the house across the street where my son's old friend, Derek, lived. I saw him dragging a shovel up the drive, his breath puffing out in small clouds. He stopped, looked across at my porch, then kept going. Later that morning, I opened the door to find a note tucked under my mat from Derek. Wasn't sure if they'd come. Thought I'd clear your drive just in case, because my own son hadn't shown up, hadn't called, and apparently someone had noticed. A few weeks later, I got a call from the church administrator. Not the same woman who hadn't known my name when I dropped off the donations. This one was older. Kind, she said, "Evelyn, I was looking over the volunteer roster and realized we haven't seen you in a long while." I told her I'd stepped back, that I was tending to personal matters. There was a pause. Then she said, "Funny, things haven't run quite the same without you." I didn't say anything. Just smiled at the floor, as if Leonard were sitting across from me, giving me that look he always did when someone finally noticed what I'd been quietly holding up. It was subtle at first, what they lost. The holiday cards stopped arriving at their houses. The ones I used to send every year each. Envelope hand-addressed, each message personal, sometimes with a short story about what Leonard and I were up to. They had become so used to receiving them, they hadn't noticed what it meant to write them. They didn't get one that year, and they never asked why. My son's youngest had a birthday in March. I used to send a handmade card with a little money tucked inside, not a lot, but folded neatly with a ribbon, and a joke written just for her. She didn't get one that year. I heard later through a neighbour's daughter who was in her class that she cried at the party. Said Grandma forgot her. She didn't know I hadn't forgotten. I had remembered exactly what silence felt like, and I was offering it back. My daughter called once in April. I let it ring. She left a message saying she hoped I was okay, that the kids missed me. That things had been complicated. Complicated is a word people use when they want to be forgiven without saying sorry. I didn't call back. By then, I was too far inside my own clarity to open the door just because someone knocked. I had started keeping a small notebook beside my bed, a list of things I no longer did. I no longer sent reminders for dentist appointments. I no longer filtered my words to make theirs feel more palatable. I no longer kept secrets for people who didn't deserve my loyalty, and I no longer confused being needed with being loved. That list grew week by week. And as it grew, I watched their lives change. I heard through Ruth at the book circle that my daughter had taken out a loan to fix her car. The kind of expense I used to cover quietly with a check and a gentle smile. No lectures, just love, disguised as help. She hadn't asked me this time. She probably knew better. Or maybe she thought I no longer had anything to give. Either way, she paid interest on something I would have given freely once. The lawyer handling my estate updates kept me informed. Every change I made, every name I removed, was documented. Properly, I didn't do it out of revenge. That would have required more energy than I had. I did it because they had shown me who they were when they thought I was too weak to notice. I simply believed them. My son must have gotten wind of it. Eventually some mail returned, a beneficiary name removed, access revoked. He didn't call me directly, but a mutual acquaintance said he'd been confused. Confused is what people say when they're not. Brave enough to admit they've been found out. I didn't clarify. That was no longer my role. Instead, I poured myself into the things that had waited patiently for me, my garden, my words, my solitude. Spring came late that year, but when it did, it was beautiful. The lilacs bloomed full and fragrant. I sat outside in the early mornings, wrapped in Leonard's robe, sipping coffee with a notebook on my lap. I wrote about grief, about forgetting, about how sometimes it isn't memory that hurts, but the way we keep pretending certain moments didn't bruise us. And I wrote about returning, not to people, to myself. Ruth invited me to a small retreat in the hills. Just a weekend. Some women, some quiet. I said yes while I was gone. My daughter showed up at the house. I know because a neighbour told me. Said she looked lost, knocked, waited, then left. She never came back. I didn't feel triumphant, just certain she had waited too long to remember where her mother lived. In losing me, they lost more than a house, or a will, or a name on a document. They lost the woman who held the seams together, who forgave early and often, who gave more than she kept. And without me, they learned slowly, but undeniably. That presence cannot be replaced. A casserole cannot be microwaved into care. A missed birthday cannot be patched with a late text. And once a mother goes quiet, she doesn't always return to the sound of your voice. What they lost was quiet. The kind of quiet that used to hum in the background of their lives. That used to answer calls, fill holidays, remember the things they forgot. And when that quiet was gone, they discovered it hadn't been silent after all. It had been love, and it had been mine. It took me 6 tries to begin the letter. Each time I opened the drawer, pulled out a clean sheet of paper, and uncapped the pen, my hand would pause, hover, then return the pen to the desk as if it had wandered somewhere it didn't belong. For months I told myself I didn't need to write anything, that I'd said enough by not saying anything at all. That silence was its own kind of message, firm, unwavering, but silence, as powerful as it is, has its limits. Sometimes silence needs a translation. So one early morning, when the light was barely shifting through the window and the kettle had just begun to hum, I sat down. No ceremony, no music. Just the ticking of the wall clock and the ache of something unfinished. This time the pen stayed in my hand, and I began, not to my children, not to Leonard, to myself, to the version of me that kept showing up, the one who smiled through dismissal, who opened her wallet before she was asked, who folded the laundry and the pain into neat, forgettable squares, who kept hoping that showing up would be enough to be seen. Dear Evelyn, I wrote. You don't have to keep making yourself small to be allowed in the room. The words came slowly, like water finding a crack. I told her I was proud of her, for staying, for surviving, for finally learning how to leave without slamming the door. I told her that she did her best, and that her best was real even if no one remembered to say thank you. I wrote about Leonard, about how he always knew when I was pretending, how he could read the exhaustion in my eyes even when my mouth said, I'm fine. I wrote about how he held my wrist once, gently, when I dropped a casserole dish in the sink and it shattered, how I had gasped, apologizing, ready for judgment, but he just said, You've been holding too much, and he was right, I told myself. It was okay to set it all down now. I wrote about the things no one saw, like the night I stayed up till 2 a.m., making a costume for a school play my daughter forgot to mention until the last minute. Or the time I sat in a cold emergency room beside my son's wife while he worked late, my hand on her back as she shook from worry. No one ever brought those nights up again, but I remembered. And now I wrote them down so I wouldn't forget myself. I wrote about the day Leonard died. The way his breathing slowed into something shallow, and then, still, how I sat beside him, not crying, just holding his hand, how the silence wasn't empty that day. It was full of everything we'd shared, the ache and the awe. I told myself. It was okay to miss him without missing the way things ended. I told myself that even if no one calls, even if no one sends flowers or says sorry or admits what they took, I am still here. Still standing, still worthy. I didn't ask for them to change. Not in the letter, not in my mind. I wrote instead about my garden, how it grew better this year than it had in the last 5. How the basil sprouted strong and the tomatoes turned red without much help, how the roses didn't bloom at first, but came back unexpectedly in late July. I wrote that healing isn't something loud. It's a slow unfurling, a root deepening in soil no one else sees. When I finished the letter, I didn't sign it. I just folded it carefully, tucked it into an envelope, and then I burned it. Not out of anger, but because I had no need to reread. It had done its work. The fire was small, contained in the ceramic bowl Leonard once used for popcorn. The paper curled quickly, the flames eating the ink like a quiet hunger. I watched it turn to ash in the same kitchen where I'd once stood for hours cooking for people who never stayed long enough to finish their plates. The flame faded, and I felt no regret. There are some things you say not to be heard, but to finally hear yourself. That was the letter that changed me. Not because it solved anything, but because it reminded me who I was before I was erased, before I was a task to complete, a ride to call, a favor to assume, before my name became a placeholder on documents they didn't think I'd read. I had a name long before they forgot how to say it gently, and I reclaimed it with every word I wrote. After the letter, things got quieter, not lonelier, just cleaner. I stopped explaining. Stopped rehearsing conversations in my head that would never happen. Stopped wondering if they would ever say, sorry. I no longer needed an apology to live in truth. I found myself smiling again, not big, not performative. Just soft little curls at the corner of my mouth when the kettle whistled or when a bird landed near the windowsill without fear. I took to journaling more often. Not reflections, not memories. Just observations, the way the light pooled on the Kitchen tiles at noon, the exact shade of the hydrangeas when the sun hit them sideways. The moment I realized I hadn't thought about them, my children, in 3 days, it was a gentle kind of freedom. Like learning how to exhale after years of holding your breath. I wrote one more letter, this time to Leonard, not long, just a few lines. I told him I missed him, that I hoped he knew I was okay, that I had forgiven more than I expected. And forgotten less than they hoped. I told him that the house still holds him, but so do I, and that I had finally remembered what he once whispered to me, half asleep, long ago. When the kids were small and our pockets were empty, and we didn't know if we'd make it through the month, he had said, "You are enough even if no one ever tells you," and I believed him now. Finally, I did. I tucked that letter into the hollow of a tree in the back garden. The one we planted in the summer nearly lost everything but didn't. The one that still grows tall. Even now, it felt right to give something back to the earth. Not to be buried, but to be held. The truth is, I don't need anything from them anymore. Not validation, not a reunion, not repaired, because what they took was real. But what did I rebuild? That was mine, entirely mine. The house breathes differently now. It doesn't creak the same in the evenings. The floor still remembers Leonard's footsteps, but mine are the only ones it answers to. There's a hush in the mornings that doesn't ask to be filled, and I no longer feel the need to talk over it. Quiet, it turns out, is not the same as loneliness. It's something else entirely. It's space, it's peaceful, it's mine. I rise slowly now, not because I'm weak, but because nothing chases me. There are no alarms, no calls to return, no obligations creeping in from the edges of my sleep. I don't scroll through messages, because there are none. And that no longer stings the way it used to. It just is. I water the garden as the sun lifts, a little at a time, the way Leonard used to teach me. Soak the soil, not the leaves, he'd say. Crouched in the dirt with his knobby knees and steady hands, the roses have returned in full this season, as if they, too, have been waiting for a different kind of silence. I walk each morning now. I take the same path through the neighborhood. Down by the creek, up past the post office. There's a man who feeds the pigeons outside the bench near the bakery. He nods when he sees me. Don't ask questions. Just acknowledges my presence like I matter, even without a name. There's something holy in being seen without being studied. I keep the house warm with soft light and open windows. I play Leonard's old records when the afternoon sun slants through the living room. Sometimes I read aloud to the empty space, not because I'm hoping for company, but because some words deserve to be spoken into the air, even if no one's listening, and maybe someone is. I don't wonder anymore if they'll call. I don't check the calendar for birthdays I'm no longer invited to. I don't rehearse the conversations we'll never have. I do send one card each year now, just one, to myself on my birthday. I write it in the same green ink Leonard used to use. I write, "Happy birthday, Evelyn, you kept going, you didn't disappear." And then I sign it with love. I find myself humming more these days, little half-tunes from the radio stations of my youth. Snippets of lullabies I once sang when the world felt soft and the children still reached for my hand without needing a reason. I keep a journal on my nightstand. Some nights I write a sentence. Others I just date the page and close the cover. It's not about capturing everything. It's about marking that I was here, that I'm still here. The quiet has become a companion. It sits beside me when I eat dinner, when I fold laundry, when I light a candle at dusk. It doesn't ask for anything, doesn't take up space. It just lets me be, and there's such mercy in that. I've started writing again, not just letters, essays, observations. I submitted a short piece to the local paper last month under a pen name. It was about resilience, about how it doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just continues. The editor emailed back to say it moved her. That was enough. I have a new friend now, Carla. The lawyer from the firm, after our work together was done, she invited me for tea one afternoon. We've met up for time since. She talks about her grown kids, her mother who lives in a retirement home in Maine, and the way people forget how to say thank you when they get comfortable. She doesn't pry, she doesn't need to. Sometimes just sitting across from someone who doesn't expect you to be anything other than exactly what you are is a kind of healing you can't name. I've come to understand that not all families are given. Some are found. Ruth from the book circle calls every Sunday. We don't talk long. She usually tells me about the birds she's been tracking in her backyard, or the new lemon bars she's trying, but her voice always ends with the same thing. I'm glad you're still here, Evelyn. And I always say, me too. I've been thinking a lot about legacy. Not the kind that's printed on glossy paper or carved into marble, but the kind that lives quietly in the lives we touch. The warm meals, the steady hands, the moments we showed up, even when no one applauded. That kind of legacy doesn't need a headline, it just needs truth, and I've lived mine, finally. I updated the will one last time last week, this time. It's not about them, it's about what feels right. A donation to the literacy program at the local school, a fund for the community garden, a note asking that the house, when sold, be offered first to a single mother looking for a fresh start. Because I know what it's like to be tired, to be unseen, to need a little softness in a world that rarely gives it freely, and I want to leave something behind that matters. Even if no one remembers my name, the birds have returned to the maple tree outside the bedroom window. They come early, sing for a while, then fly off without fanfare. No announcement, no expectation, just a song. That's how I want to go, too, not with noise. But with music only I could make it. I have no anger left in me, that left a while ago. Somewhere between the second missed call and the final erased document, what remains is not rage or revenge. It's peaceful, earned, intentional, and in that peace, I've found something worth more than restoration. I've found a release. My life is quiet now, no slammed doors, no swallowed words. No waiting by windows, just light, soft, steady light, and a silence that does not ache any more. A silence that finally feels like home. I wasn't angry, I was finally empty, and that was beautiful. They say a woman disappears as she ages. Her voice fades, her face softens into lines they don't bother to look at anymore. Her stories get smaller, her shoes more sensible, her meals eaten alone. But I haven't disappeared, I've just gone. Inward, the world outside has grown quieter. Yes, my days don't involve school pickups or phone calls about errands. There are no invitations arriving in the mail, no calendars filled with other people's needs written in red ink. But what I have now, in this soft and unhurried place, is something I never expected to find after so much leaving. I have returned to myself. Each day begins the same way, with stillness. I open my eyes before the light fully enters the room. The wind plays in the maple outside the window, tapping branches against the glass like it's checking I'm still here. I reach for my robe, Leonard's old one, and I pad softly to the kitchen. There's no need to rush. The tea tastes the same whether the water boils at 7 or 7:15. I take the mug out to the porch and sit. Birds are louder now that I listen. I used to live by noise, not the loud kind, not shouting or traffic or chaos, but the noise of other people's needs, the clatter of expectations, the rustle of trying to stay needed. It never left space for this kind of silence. The kind where you can hear your own breath and not feel like it's a waste of air. I write a few lines most mornings, not for anyone else, just little fragments of colours I notice, a scent on the breeze, a thought I want to return to. There's an entire journal now of words meant for no one, and that's what makes them sacred. They're mine, this new rhythm I've built. It's slow and deliberate, but it's not empty. I tend the garden with more care than I did before, not because I have more time, but because I've stopped rushing to prove myself. There's nothing left to prove. Not to children who see only obligation, not to neighbours who speak in half smiles and long pauses. The soil remembers my hands. The roses bloom fuller this year. I talk to them sometimes. I know it sounds silly, but they bloom anyway. So maybe they don't mind. I see Carla now and then. We don't talk about the case anymore. That part of my life has closed gently, like a door that no longer sticks. She brings over scones sometimes, and we sit on the porch together. To women who have earned their stillness, she tells me about her son's engagement, about how she's learning to bake gluten-free for his fiancée. I listen, and I tell her about the cardinals in my yard, about the mint that's taken over the back row of the planter box. We don't ask for more than we're given. That, too, is a kind of love. Sometimes Ruth brings books for us to swap. She likes mysteries, I like character studies. We argue gently over endings. She always wants resolution. I just want the truth. People don't change that fast, I say, and she agrees with her eyes. Even if her lips still want hope, we sit in companionable disagreement, and it comforts me more than agreement ever did. There's a new woman at the garden co-op, Anna, widowed at 60. Wears overalls and has a laugh that starts in her belly. She told me once, without warning. I stopped. Forgiving people who never asked for it. I nodded. I didn't say anything. But I think I forgave myself that day. For staying too long in places that bruised me. For wanting to be loved so badly that I accepted less. For shrinking inside my own life and calling it service. The truth is, I was always enough. But I needed the silence and the absence too. Remember, some days I drive out to the lake, I bring a sandwich and a worn-out novel and sit in the car with the windows cracked. The breeze off the water feels like Leonard's laugh, steady, kind, familiar. I don't cry anymore. I just sat knowing him, of us. Of how we held each other through decades of quiet work and unglamorous love. Grief has softened. In me, not disappeared, just shifted, like a stone moved to the edge of the path, still present, but no longer in the way. I don't think much about the will anymore. The new version is locked away, signed. Notarized, clean. I left a letter with it, not to accuse, just to explain, to say, this was mine. This was what I chose, because you did not choose me. I didn't send it, but it's there. A final truth, tucked beside legal language and witness signatures, if they read it someday. I hope they feel something, not guilt. That isn't my burden to hand down, but recognition of the woman they once called Mom, Grandma, Evelyn, and didn't really see. I still bake sometimes, a pie when the apples turn, a loaf of bread when the days stretch out. I freeze slices. Label them in neat handwriting, not for anyone else. Just in case one day I want to taste something I made with my own hands. Proof that I was still nourishing something, even now, even here. There's a little girl in the neighborhood who walks past with her dad most afternoons. She waves, I wave back. She reminds me of my granddaughter, the one who used to call me Grand Evie. I don't think she remembers now, but that's all right. I remember, and some memories we carry for ourselves alone. I don't dream much anymore. Not like I used to. My sleep is deeper, undisturbed. But when I do dream, it's often of water. A boat rocking gently, a shoreline approaching. I'm never afraid, just watching, waiting. I think that's how the end will feel when it comes. Not dramatic, not sharp, just a release, a soft drift toward the next thing. And when that day comes, I hope someone finds the journals, the letters, the garden is still blooming. I hope they see the woman who stayed kind, even after the world forgot to be kind to her. The woman who didn't disappear just became quieter, sharper, more whole. The kind of woman I still am, even now, especially now, because silence was never the end of me. It was the return, and I made it back.